the London docks, a heavy, suffocating veil that blurred the line between the land and the restless waters beyond. Horses stamped their hooves against the cobblestones, steam curling from their nostrils like a phantom's breath. The carriage rolled to a halt, its polished edges gleaming dully in the muted daylight. Fitzroy Bray stepped out, his small frame dwarfed by the bustling chaos that surrounded him. The docks were alive with movement. Sailors shouted orders, crates were hoisted aboard ships, and the sea groaned like a leviathan stretching its limbs. It was a world in motion, but to Fitzroy it felt still. Heavy, unforgiving. Loaded onto a ship, like so much cargo, I would be sent far to the east, banished for who I was, for the danger that hunted me. The ship loomed before him, its masts reaching into the grey sky like skeletal fingers. Fitzroy hesitated at the base of the gangplank, his eyes tracing the weathered wood that led to his fate. Around him, the dock workers bustled with purpose, their coarse voices mingling with the cries of gulls overhead. No one paid him any mind. He was just another small figure in a sea of movement. But to Fitzroy, the weight of the moment was inescapable, suffocating. His small feet carried him forward, the gangplank swaying beneath him with the rhythm of the tides. Each step felt deliberate, final. The ship's crew worked around him, their faces weathered and indifferent, pulling ropes and shouting orders as though he didn't exist. The plank began to pull away from the dock, severing Fitzroy's last physical tie to the world he knew. And then, without warning, Fitzroy bolted. His small legs carried him back across the plank, cutting through the bustle as if his very life depended on it. The sailors shouted in confusion, but Fitzroy didn't hear them. His eyes were locked on his father, standing near the carriage. Fitzroy threw himself against Lord Bray's waist, his arms wrapping tight, as though he could anchor himself to the man who represented his last shred of stability. Lord Bray stiffened, hands hovering for a moment before he gently pried the boy's arms loose. He stooped, his kneeling down to meet his son's gaze. Fitzroy's face was pale, his eyes wide, glistening with unspoken desperation. "Promise me, my son," Bray said, his voice low, steady, almost soft against the chaos surrounding them. "When the ship pulls away, you will not look back, but forwards. Always forwards, toward the time when we are together again." The words landed heavily, each one sinking into Fitzroy like stones thrown into a well. He stared at his father, the man's resolute stare holding him in place. The promise was unthinkable, unbearable, but Fitzroy knew he couldn't refuse. Slowly, he nodded. The two embraced, and for a moment, the bustling docks seemed to quiet, the sounds fading into a dull hum. The weight of separation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Anschult stepped forward, his hand settled firmly on Fitzroy's shoulder. There was little softness in his touch, little comfort. It was practical, businesslike, as though guiding the boy onto the path that had already been decided. From that moment on, I was alone, free to go anywhere I desired, within the confines of my cage. The ship pulled away from the dock, its hull cut through the water with an indifference that mocked Fitzroy's aching heart. He stood at the stern, his small hands gripping the rail as the land slipped further and further away. The bustling docks faded into the fog, swallowed by distance, until all that remained was the endless expanse of the ocean. The waves surged and rolled, their movements unpredictable, chaotic. Fitzroy stared into the horizon, his young face etched with an expression far too old for his years. He didn't look back, just as his father had told him. But the promise weighed heavy, dragging down his small frame as he tried to hold his head high. The ship creaked and groaned beneath him, a foreign world he was now bound to navigate. Fitzroy felt the emptiness of the sea stretching before him, vast and uncaring. He was alone, truly alone, adrift in a world that seemed determined to swallow him whole. The sun hung high over the open ocean, its unrelenting glare shimmering on the waves like molten silver. The ship was alive with activity, its crew moving with practiced efficiency, each man locked in his own rhythm. Ropes creaked and sails snapped in the salty breeze, the hull groaning with the endless push and pull of the sea. Fitzroy wandered the deck, his small figure dwarfed by the towering masts and the sprawling canvas above him. He wasn't part of this world, not really. To the crew, He was an outsider, a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst. And in that open cage, I found life. I tasted the briny salt of the sea, felt the sting of the ocean sweat in my eyes, and drifted in sleep with soft waves as a lullaby. His steps faltered as he passed one of the sailors, a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and calloused hands. Their shoulders brushed, a momentary contact that sent a ripple through the air. The sailor turned abruptly, his face twisted in disdain. Before Fitzroy could react, the man's hand shoved against his chest, sending him sprawling to the deck. Fitzroy's palms scraped against the rough wood as laughter erupted around him, the sound sharp and biting. Fitzroy pushed himself up, his chest heaving with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. As he stood, his eyes caught movement, a streak of black darting across the deck. The ship's cat emerged, sleek and silent, a rat clamped tightly in its jaws. Fitzroy watched as the cat toyed with its prey for a moment before sinking its teeth into the rat's neck. The sound was faint, but it carried, a brutal punctuation to the scene. The cat dropped the lifeless creature and padded off, indifferent to the chaos around it. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of shifting blues and greys. Fitzroy leaned against the rail, the sting of salt in his eyes, the hum of the crew's laughter still ringing in his ears. He stared into the horizon, his young face etched with an expression that spoke of lessons learned the hard way. The transition to night was seamless, the ocean shifting from silver to deep indigo as the day surrendered to the stars. The ship glided across the water, its silhouette cutting a path toward the lights of a port city. The shoreline glimmered, the buildings clustered like jewels beneath a canopy of constellations. The faint sound of an evening prayer floated across the water, a melody that seemed to merge with the gentle lapping of the waves. Months passed. Around the great horn of the dark continent, through the tropics and onto India, it was all part of Her Majesty's empire. But the ocean, the endless waves, they belonged to men who tempted to captain their own fate. The open ocean was wild, a roiling tempest of salt and spray that tested every plank, every knot, every hand aboard. Anschult's ship pitched and rolled against the swells, each wave crashing against its sides with a violence that could make even the most seasoned sailor doubt his chances. Above the din of the sea, the cry of a lookout pierced the air, a single voice rising above chaos. A sailor climbed with desperate speed, his boots scraping against the mast as he ascended to the crow's nest. His movements were quick, almost frantic, driven by something far more dangerous than the storm itself. At the top, the sailor froze. His telescope extended, the brass instrument catching the faint light of the overcast sun. The horizon shifted and swayed as he focused in. And there it was, a shape cutting through the distance, growing larger with every second. An oriental junk, its silhouette distinct, its purpose unmistakable. The sailor's hands shook as he lowered the telescope. His face twisted into something primal, fear, raw and unrestrained. He scrambled back down the mast, his voice hoarse and trembling as he shouted to the men below. In the dim confines of Fitzroy's cabin, the world was far quieter. The boy lay stretched across the thin mattress, his fingers teasing the ship's black cat as it batted lazily at a loose thread on the blanket. The creature's eyes gleamed like twin embers in the murky light, its tail flicking in boredom. Fitzroy grinned faintly, the smallest comfort in a life filled with displacement and unease. And then, the peace shattered. The sharp crack of gunfire tore through the air, followed by the sickening sound of splintering wood. The ship lurched violently to one side, throwing Fitzroy against the wall. The cat hissed, darting under the bed with a flick of its tail. Fitzroy pushed himself up, his pulse racing as the sudden chaos above pressed down on him like a tidal wave. He hesitated at the door, his small hand trembling on the knob. Slowly, he opened it a crack, peeking into the shadowed hallway. The light from a shattered lantern flickered weakly against the blood-smeared walls. A crewman staggered toward him, his movements heavy and uneven, his mouth crimson with the blood spilled forth. The man's eyes met Fitzroy's, desperate and pleading, as he reached out. Then he fell, lifeless, his hand limp at his side. Fitzroy slammed the door shut, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He locked it, sliding the latch with shaking fingers, and stumbled back to the bed. The fighting raged above, the clash of steel, the roar of gunpowder, the guttural cries of men locked in mortal struggle. Fitzroy curled into himself, his knees pulled to his chest, his arms wrapped tightly around them. He could do nothing but wait. And slowly the sounds of battle subsided, petered out, and fell silent. And then voices. Words spoken he did not know, tongues he could not understand. Men of foreign lands, dressed in foreign cloth, and of a different disposition. Shoved sternly from behind, Fitzroy stumbled to his knees on the salty, wet wood of the ship's planks. The deck of the Oriental junk was alive with motion. The crew, men of the Orient, men hardened by the sea and its cruelties, moved with a wild energy, with the fervor of victory. Fitzroy stood among them, his wrists bound, his young face pale and drawn. The ship's boards swayed beneath his feet as the junk pulled away from Anschult's humbled vessel. And then an arrow sliced through the air, its tip ablaze with flame. It landed with a hiss and a spark, fire spreading across the deck, a fire that consumed with greed, licking hungrily at the wood and rope. Fitzroy watched, frozen, as the Union Jack above the ship tasted the flames, the symbol of empire reduced to ash and smoke. His throat tightened, but no sound escaped. What could he say? What could he do? The pirates cheered, their voices rising in triumph as a barrel of black powder ignited, rupturing Anschult's ship with devastating force. The explosion tore through the hull, splintering its form. Fitzroy felt the blast as a vibration through the boards beneath his feet, a reminder of the power that had sealed his fate. His eyes darted to a giant crew member among his peers, a man whose size seemed almost impossible, whose strength was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The flotsam drifted in the water, charred fragments of a ship that had once been a haven, an uncomfortable, imperfect haven, but a haven that he knew. Fitzroy's eyes fixed on the burning Union Jack as it disintegrated into the sky. The flames illuminated the darkness creeping into his heart, the understanding that survival meant adaptation. The rules had changed. The cage he lived in was no longer confined to Anschult's ship. It was vast and boundless, an endless sea that asked not for permission but for submission. The dim lantern light swung sluggishly from the rafters, casting long, jagged shadows over the ship's cramped hull. The air was thick with the briny stink of stagnant seawater and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Fitzroy winced as the bamboo cage door was slammed shut behind him. The bars rattled, a final insult punctuated by the laughter of the pirates. They were amused by their treasure and cared not to hide it. Amused that this small boy, a pale ghost in their brutal world, was crammed into a prison barely large enough for a dog. Their chuckles lingered as they sauntered away, their sandaled feet thudding against the wooden planks. The sound disappeared up the stairs, replaced by the groan of the ship fighting the tide. Fitzroy hunched over, trying to adjust his thin frame to the confines of the cage. His knees pressed uncomfortably to his chest, his shoulders brushing the rough bamboo. He breathed deeply, willing himself to calm, but it was like trying to steady a flame in a storm. The ship creaked, swaying rhythmically, and somewhere above he heard muffled voices, distant and cruel. He strained his eyes, peering into the gloom that swallowed most of the hull. The shadows seemed alive, moving with the sway of the lantern light. Then, out of the darkness, something moved. His breath caught as a set of hands appeared, pale and thin, curling around the bars of another cage at the far end of the room. Fitzroy squinted, willing his eyes to adjust. A second cage, just like his, sat in the shadows, a mirror of his captivity. Whoever was inside didn't speak. They simply held the bars, fingers tightening, as if testing their reality. Fitzroy shriveled, shivering under the wet cold of night, now seeping into his bones. He leaned back against the bars of his prison and closed his eyes, but the image of those ghostly hands burned in his mind. Not far off, another prisoner was held captive, just as he, another soul trapped in the darkness. And the pirates' laughter still echoed faintly, a cruel reminder of those who held power over their fates.